right, welcome to Let's Talk About Mental Health. I'm Nels Kloster. I'm an addiction psychiatrist.
And my name is Robert Stack. I'm a licensed alcohol and drug counselor and licensed mental health counselor. Good evening.
And just a reminder, we look forward to your questions, and there are two ways to get a hold of us. One is through our Facebook site at facebook.com/Let's Talk VT, and the other is our email site at our email account at questions@letstalkvt.com.
Okay. So, good evening. And last week, we ended the show with a question that I read it, and basically what it says, can I do AA without God? And I
mean, a big question, and we had very little time.
That's right.
So we should
so we said, well, we'll come back to it. And I've actually been thinking about it, and I did a little research, and this is a major issue in AA. And there's a wonderful article that I'm reading by William White and Ernie Kurtz. And Ernie Kurtz is a writer. He wrote about AA, wrote Not God. He was actually one of my instructors when I went down to Rutgers School of Alcohol Studies as a apprentice counselor. And I got to meet him and take classes with him. But he wrote this article about one of the things that's happening in AA today is this, as society becomes more secular, and more people are being sent to AA. And the difference is when the founders, both of them were brought up in New England, both of them had religions that they were exposed to growing up, not particularly religious, but exposed to them. And that was also true of most of the members of AA. The early AA people, most of them, I think at the turn of the century, when I say that 20th century, 90% of the people in America not only believed in God, but associate themselves with a religion per se. Whether they went every week or, it's not clear. But the idea is that most people had a religion. And nowadays it's not quite so. A lot of young people have grown up without going to church, without attendance, or really minimum. And so you now have people coming into AA who are sort of, not really believing in God.
But I think we talked about spirituality one season, we realized that there's still the vast majority of people who say believe in God or higher power. So there's still that sense of belief there, but it's become maybe broader based or more about spirituality than religiosity.
And that has, in some ways, in AA, the individual groups have their own interpretations. And so if you go to one group and they say, I'm having a hard time with God, they'll say, well, use it as an acronym, GOD, group of drunks. Or you'll go to another, and a newcomer will come in and say, I'm not acquainted with God. And they'll say, okay, well, use the group as a power grading yourself, because that's all step 2 says. Step 1 is I'm powerless. Step 2 says came to believe in a power grading myself, restoring me sanity. So people would say, okay, if you could just agree, but maybe the group wisdom, and higher power is your group. And that's sort of okay. But when you get to the third step, it talks about turn your will and your life over to the care of God as you understand them. And so for a lot of folks, that's a really difficult moment, because I don't understand God, I don't believe in God, I don't, there's this whole backlash. I don't know if that's the right word, but there's two things happening in AA. There are some groups in AA who are saying we're getting away from the founders, we're getting away from the basics, we're getting away from talking about God, and we're going to follow what it says in the big book that was published in 1939. And then you have other groups that sort of say, well, we're changing. We're different groups. We have minorities, we have women, we have lots of different people coming to our groups. We have people of different belief systems, and it even goes to like the closing prayer. Traditionally, the closing prayer was the Lord's Prayer, and so that was a fairly common in AA. No matter where you went, they closed with the Lord's Prayer. About 10 years ago, maybe 20 years, I'm not sure when, but they start using the Serenity Prayer. And the Serenity Prayer is non-denominational in some ways. It's not associated with any one faith, if you will, and people are more comfortable saying it. Right. And you'll see that there's meetings that use one and not the other. And anyway, so I want to give this question its due. People say you can use the fellowship, you can use AA without a firm belief in God. Other people will tell you that, if you go to AA and you work the steps, you will begin to experience something like they call the grace of God. Now, what does that stand for? But that's where you begin to say, AA has a chapter in there, what they call the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, and it says a chapter to the agnostics. Yeah. And you would think that that's the chapter that explains how you could do AA.
This is how we'll get along, right?
Yeah, as an agnostic. But what the chapter actually says is it says, if you come to AA and you work these steps, what you'll do is you'll come to believe in God.
So you'll get over it and you'll become one of us.
Yeah, in a way. It's sort of, and it's, I know I've talked a long time here, but I mean, there's this wonderful line in AA. It says, I'm going to paraphrase it, but it basically says, you have a choice between being doomed to an alcoholic death or living a spiritual life. Okay. And then the next sentence says, and this is not an easy choice.
Well, yeah, it's very stark. It's either black or it's white. It sounds like, no shades of gray in between.
There's no shades. They actually say that at one point. There either is God or there isn't God. Either you believe this is just mindless, outer space, and or there is a God.
I mean, that almost sounds like if you're not a member of this faith, you're doomed to hell.
Well, I don't know about doomed to hell, but they, and here's where it gets tricky, because they felt when they first, wrote the book, there was a very small group of them. They were desperate, and they believed that it was like, if everything else failed, if everything, if you've tried your own self-will, there's a line in the book that says, self-will and knowledge will not stop you from drinking. Yeah. And so let's say you knew a very hard-driving, intelligent doctor, engineer, somebody who, has worked their whole life, and they're alcoholics, and they find out they can't stop drinking.
Right, that force of will, that discipline, that so goal setting, doesn't get it.
And all that knowledge and all that, it doesn't seem to work. They go to expensive treatments, they go to Betty Ford, they go here, they go there. They come out, they know everything about the disease, but they don't stop drinking.
Right.
And then so people say, well, at that point, why don't you try God? So I think on some level it was sort of, I don't know. I don't know if some people go to AA prematurely or they go before they're ready. I mean, I hate to say that because, everybody, I think if you have trouble with alcohol, if you're an alcoholic, you should go to AA. But so anyway, I don't know how to answer this. I imagine you could go to AA and stay sober without a firm belief in God.
Yeah. But a lot of things that are traditional insist on sort of by rote. It's the same words every time after time. Like the Lord's Prayer hasn't changed for centuries, I guess.
Right.
And the idea that if this is the way the founders deigned it to be, then this is the way it needs to continue to be. But I almost wonder that with something like AA and the God piece, I mean, when Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob were sort of getting together with this, that was sort of prevailing culture at the time, right? People were going to church, people were believing in God. I mean, the Jews were barred from country clubs. I don't think anybody even knew what a Muslim was back in those times. And this was, then trying to sort of interpret historical events in our current day context, what they call revisionist history, that just sort of sets us up for being judgmental and sort of missing the important message in this.
But we still believe in spirituality, and that's where some people will tell you that, I don't have a religion, but I believe in spirituality. I believe in a spiritual life. And I this is just me, but we saw that movie about the heroin addicts up in northern Vermont.
The Hungry Heart, where I have a hole in my heart that got filled with drugs. A hole in my heart, and I firmly believe that's spiritual. I mean, it's not intellectual, it's not physical. Obviously, it's not a hole in it. And I think one of the things that alcohol and drugs does is it fills the spiritual loneliness, that sense of disconnect, if you will. And I know people, and that people love them, they're in families, they're not alone. They feel terribly alone, and they feel terribly empty for some reason. And I really believe that emptiness is spiritual. And I'm not going to apologize for that either. I mean, I do believe in it. And so I think on some level, and even AA, it says, the solution is spiritual. It's not intellectual. It's not knowledge. It's not self-will. It's the trick is, how do you define spirituality? Do you find it as mercy, forgiveness, love? I mean, what does it mean when if you've ever met somebody who is spiritual, they seem to be at peace with themselves.
They seem to be at peace with the world even. So I mean, you know, sometimes when you think about spirituality, you can think about like heaven, you know, a vertical, right? I mean, you know, but other people, and I have a good friend that's a nurse that we used to work with in the hospital, and she would say that spirituality was horizontal. It was between us. It was an experience that you shared with another person. And it had to do with that. And that was her belief of spirituality. So, and it was in that belief that she got sober.
Right.
I mean, you know, that you know, helping others and being, you know, living a certain lifestyle. You know, it's kind of weird for me. Like, I don't want to argue for God. I can't prove it. I can't say there is. But I feel comfortable saying that I think you need to develop a spiritual life if you want to maintain sobriety.
Well, I mean, people, and again, there's often criticism of a lack of research around AA. Why does it work? How does it work? And one of the pieces that I've recently read about is that the most important factor in its success seems to be that it's a commitment to a community that encourages not drinking or, you know, not drugging, and that is a unique experience for people. And I think that really speaks to the idea of that sort of bond you're talking about, whether it's part of our makeup as social animals or whether it's a sense of a higher purpose. Because when I'm talking to people who sort of, you know, resist this idea of God, you know, I'll often sort of start to maybe try to get them to open up a little bit about this thought. I say, well, are you it? Are you the center of the universe, or you know, do you believe that you're sort of the height of it all? And I'm going, no, I mean, nobody ever says that they believe that if they're unless they're psychotic at the time. But, so most of them with that piece, they're like, well, no, I'm not the great. I believe in this, I believe in that, and that's often the way I think. Again, it's a shame. I mean, AA is not for everybody, but to cut off yourself from something that's very effective, I think is unfortunate. And so I try to sort of get the idea there are similarities here. God was the language back in the 50s, 60s, all that time, and right now we talk about spirituality, but they're not foreign. We're still humans, we're still pack animals, we're still looking for that sort of sense of the universe, and that was the way it was said back then, and this is the way it's said right now, and sort of, in other words, I mean, get over it. Right? Don't let that be the hindrance, basically focusing on a choice of words. Right,
and I just finished with it, you know, as you know, in a hospital, if I was meeting with somebody and it was their first time in treatment, and they would tell me how they're going to get better, which is a good idea. They're going to exercise, they're going to ride a bicycle, they're going to do whatever it is. And I'd say, good
for you, go for it.
You know, try it, you know, I hope it works out, you know, we'll get you detox, you know. We have an aftercare plan, but, you know, this, you know, doing it. Second time they would come see me, they would have this other plan. Well, I'm going to go to therapy this time, and I'm going to take med. Okay, let's go. Try that.
So changes are incremental.
Yeah, but by the time the third or fourth admission, I would say, listen, just go to AA. You know, enough of this. You know, I mean, he really doesn't seem to be able to stop. You say you want to stop. You're committed to you want to get it better. You better give AA a chance before you decide you don't want to do it. And so, you know, I guess I'll just leave it at that. I won't go on any further about this, but I mean, it's something that people say. They'll say, I don't want to go to AA because of the God business, and I always suspect that they don't. I don't know if that's fair, but I sometimes think it's an easy reason not to go to AA, because most people, I think, by now realize that if you go to AA, you'll stop drinking.
Yeah.
And
try to find a community. Find something that works for you. AA works for most.
That's right.
Is most effective, but there's some other more sort of secular programs and other ways around it.
Okay. All right, I'll stop.
Good. So we have another question here. So this one is: living in fear of relapse a good motivator to stay clean, or an unhealthy way to live, or both? All right. Yeah. No, I there's a lot in this one.
That's right. That's right.
I think really, I mean, fear of relapse, it tends to be, well, I mean, fear, I mean, how good a motivator has that ever been for somebody, whether it's a child, it's somebody in recovery, it's a partner, it's a friend, or, you know, yourself trying to motivate yourself towards some better, you know, healthier activities.
Well, we got this question from a friend of the program, somebody who's very supportive of the program and has been, and I think it's a good one. And I just say very quickly that, you know, not quick. I never say anything quickly, but You know, I used to try and make a distinction sometimes between lapse and relapse. And so sometimes, you know, in early recovery, it's not unusual for someone to pick up and use again. I mean, you know, whatever way, especially if you continue to associate with people who are using, or if you're around a lot of people who are using, or you go to situations. So, you know, there are that, I would say, almost spontaneous relapse. You know, someone passes you a joint, or you know, you end up at a party, and you know, next thing you know, there's a drink in your hand.
People, places, and things, which is said over and over again.
And so what I would suggest to them is, okay, you had a lapse, but you're still in recovery, you're still going to therapy and counseling, maybe you're active in program and AA and stuff, and so don't overreact to it, because one of the dangers is, all right, I ruined my sobriety date, I can't stay sober, I might as well get drunk.
Right, I'm just an addict, I'm just a drunk.
This is not going to work, and I knew it wasn't going to work, and I'll go back. And So I always try and caution people and say, okay, if that happens to you, you know, don't use it as a reason to keep using it. I mean, treat it as a lapse, stay in recovery, and as time goes by, you know, you'll probably drink less, you'll have less relapses, whatever way you want to talk about it.
From personal experience too, I think we all understand that having failures, having accidents, falling off our bike, getting back up, we learn so many more things to help us sort of correct our course than if we get it right and aren't quite sure how we got it right. Getting that wrong, I've always told people that falling down, making mistakes, has really been a much greater learning experience for me every time it's happened.
Right.
And so in that way, it's that frame of mind, right? So getting people set up that I just had an amazing learning experience. I need to rework my plan, you know, look at my recovery program, and that's much more useful than, as you were saying, I'm just a drunk, I'm just an addict, I'm doomed, I might as well give in and just, you know, keep drinking and drugging.
Right, and fear is okay. I mean, occasionally I would frame a question like, you know, if I go someplace, I'm more or less likely to get high. In early recovery, and nobody likes to think this way, but in early recovery, you almost have to decide how much risk is worth it. If I go someplace where people are getting high, is that worth it?
Right. Is that friendship that I have with those people?
That's right. Is that really worth the risk? And if you can, you know, AA, I guess it says, you know, if you have business somewhere and you're going to a going away retirement party, go there. But as soon as you're doing it just to hang out with people drinking, then it's probably not a good idea. And I think there's probably some truth to that. If you want to go to a bar to get a burger, go ahead, you know. But if you see yourself, you know, reminiscing about the good old days, or thinking about how good it would be.
Right, that burger with a beer, I remember how good those two went together.
And can you do that? And is that safe for you? Is that something that is safe for you? So I think a certain amount of fear is healthy. I mean, it's sort of like, you know, I believe that if I take one drink, there's a good chance I'll keep drinking. There's a good chance, and I can't predict what's going to happen. And the way to prevent, you know, getting drunk is not to take the first drink. So what I think fear is handy. I think it's a good way of thinking about it. I remember once I was working with a fella, and he had relapse because he let his friends come over. His friends got high, and he ended up getting high with them. And this individual was on probation. And I said to him, you know, I said, would you allow somebody in your family to come in your house who was a threat to your family? Right. And he goes, no. What, are you kidding me? And I said, but yeah, if you go to jail again, there's a good chance that, you know, your children are going to live without you. Yeah. And you know, there's things that are going to change. And he was thinking about that, like, you know, okay, so it isn't just about me having my friend over to visit and he's going to get high in the house. I got to think about what will happen if I get high and what will be the consequences. And I think that's a healthy way of thinking about it. I mean,
and I think that, you know, pain and maybe fear of consequences is an early motivator, or gets people into treatment early on, right? It's like we've heard people talk about, you know, get the DUI and seeing the blue lights in the back there, or realizing that you know, you've used needles for the first time with heroin, or it's used heroin for the first time, and that's sort of so she's sort of, you know, a kick in the teeth. Sort of gets your attention, and you don't want further consequences. You don't want to go to jail. You don't want to, you know, go down that path, being one of those kinds of addicts. And that is sort of gets you off the inertia, right? Also, there's a big shock, and in you go towards some sort of treatment. I found that pain is a motivator with a limited lifespan. I mean, if you think about it, in one case, if pain stopped us from ever repeating an activity, we'd probably all be only children, right? So at some point, you look at the positives, you look at the joy of certain things, and I've been telling people I work with is that's great. They get you started. But if you really want to sort of grasp it, the idea of recovery is it's a quality of life issue, and that you need to see good things happening. Rather than sort of looking back over your shoulder all the time for I don't want that thing to catch me, I think looking ahead towards something that's good and something that's productive and gratifying and successes, that is a much better motivator towards developing a full life and developing a recovery.
I don't remember, but if I mentioned last week, I was reading an article in the Times that said about sometimes we're taught fear, and this it was a very small little piece, but it basically said one of the things they're concerned about is that when you're taught fear in an unhealthy way, it sometimes will affect later events. And in this article, they were specifically talking about PTSD. Do people react differently to the fear factor? Right. And when they replay it and everything and some of the stuff. So I didn't quite get it. It was just a little piece. But I thought about that you wonder sometimes, do I, when I had a dog, did I transfer my emotions and feelings, to my, to my children? Did I,
right.
Teach them my fear? Like children, I think is a healthy fear. They learn, certain things. But I wonder sometimes, did I share my fear with them? You know what I mean? And it's an interesting article. I'm sorry I mentioned it. I mean, it's a little bit off topic.
But it sounds very similar that it was sort of the way expectations are framed. So we're talking about lapsing and relapsing versus lapsing. What the emotion that you bring to that, the pre-sense of it, then that really has a lot to do with how well you weather that. So exactly, if the child falls down and hurts their knee, and you make a big deal out of it, then they learn to be fearful of that. Whereas if you don't say anything, like, I fell down, so what? I move on. Right. But I think it has some similarities from lapsing and relapsing. And what we know about people who are more prone to develop PTSD, there's often that sense that they didn't do everything they could, or that they were helpless in that situation, that plays a big role then in having difficulties after the event.
And I've been in workshops where they do talks and lectures, and one of them was that the more the fear and faith and belief and recovery are on a continuum, on one line, and the more fear, the more recovery, more faith and belief and recovery, less fear.
Okay.
In other words, there's somehow it's all connected. This thing about not having any faith in yourself or in life, and or just faith, the big capital F faith in a higher power, you begin to live a more fearful life. If you have faith in the program, if you have faith in a higher power, you live a less fearful program because you have that sense of not being alone. But again, I think this person, because they watched our show and they know our show, they gave us an out. They said, is it both?
Or both, yeah. I think we, in a way, just said it is both.
It is. I mean, you don't want to be, you want to trust, you want to enjoy yourself in recovery. You don't want to be overly afraid. But I think you want to be conscious and be very careful about, like you said earlier before the show, people, places, and things. Have an awareness, what's risky, and again, is whatever you're getting ready to do, is it worth the risk? So anyway.
Right. Sometimes it's not, yeah.
All right.
Good. And then one more.
All right. This one, and actually we've answered this in a year ago, I think, if not 2 years ago, but we'll do it again.
Solid question.
All right. My family keeps bringing up my past. They're angry at me. And this is a great question. How long is fair?
How long is fair? Yeah.
I hope they're watching. No.
That's yeah. I mean, that's good because. I've often everybody struggles with this, right? Early recovery. It's this time I really mean it, and this time I'm making these steps, and my family just doesn't get it. They don't support me. They're against me. They keep bringing up all these old pains that I inflicted on them with my drug use. And I mean, how long is for them? I was it could be years or decades, right?
You
Depending
going to tell your pumpkin story?
Well, yeah, you know, I don't know if I should, but I mean, it's minor compared to
Go
this.
ahead.
But I mean, one Thanksgiving, I'm a teenager, we're going to visit family, and I dropped the pumpkin pie. And I left a big stain on the back carpet. We never changed the carpet. And so every year from like 17 to now 55, I got to hear the story. Don't let him carry the pie. So that's been, what then, 37 years. So I say 30 years is long enough.
That's long enough, huh?
Let it go for something like that. But that's much minor. That's almost sort of that's a good spirited thing. I've juggled pies since, but
that's it.
I think that one thing is hard is that the family members keep bringing these things up. I think, almost referring to the question, is they're living in fear.
Yeah.
Right. We've been hurt. We've touched that hot. We've touched that flame before.
Yeah.
We've had faith. We've believed the things, and then we've been hurt. Then when it didn't work out, when they lapsed or relapsed,
right.
And a lot of us again are trying to protect ourselves from pain, especially emotional pain, and the easiest way to do that is to shut down.
Right. And I think the operative word in the question really, well, a couple of them, but one is angry. I mean, like when they tell the story about you and your Thanksgiving pie, I mean, it's a folklore now. It's a family story,
I mean, we just bought a pie from the store.
And they say it with affection, and they say it, to keep you humble.
Right. But it's affectionate.
That's right. And I think, and I think that also happens with addicts and alcoholics, some of the things that people have done. But if it's early enough, there's nothing to laugh about. Right. I mean, they're still, and I think like you're saying, they're still hurting from it. They are afraid that it's going to repeat. And one of the reasons they bring it up is they don't want you to forget. And I remember I used to do family weekends, and it was like we'd have families in on Saturday, and they would come, and I used to do a little morning thing. And, sometimes families would literally say that. I don't want them to forget what they've done to us. Mm-hmm. I mean, they were so upset. And first of all, most of the clients I work with, they can't forget what they've done. They know what they did.
They don't need a reminder.
Yeah,
they just don't.
But also on some level, I was reading recently about the immature defense mechanisms, and one of the things was like a psychosis denial. And it was Valiant, I think. I don't know. I mean, the book was by Valiant. But anyway, he was talking about how there's almost total disconnect from reality.
Right.
And so you would sometimes hear like an alcoholic say, well, it wasn't that bad.
Right.
And the rest of the family like, oh, what are you,
what
are you, crazy?
Right?
It really
terrible,
was bad. And so I think sometimes, and it's kind of interesting, I think some recovery folks, in early recovery, want to say, well, look, the past is past, I'm sober, we don't need to bring that up anymore.
Yeah. But when you think about sort of, I think, some sociology classes that I've taken, is that, one of the things that happens here, and like with, let's say, like crimes, for example, or sins, if you will, is that you break the bonds of the community. You break that intimate bond with the people you love, with your family, with your neighborhood, with the larger community. And to repair that bond almost requires sort of paying a price, whether it's the 10 Hail Marys, you fix that window that you broke, that sort of thing. And I think that bringing up these stories in a way is that you haven't paid enough. I don't feel like you've paid me enough of a price yet for me to forgive that and take you back. Or maybe it has to be with certain conditions.
Right, and I would get, and I'm turning out to be a promoter here for AA, but AA has those 12-step programs, and one of them is about making amends, and it's like number 9, I think it is, number 9. And so, if you're working a program, get a sponsor, get a therapist, talk about how to make amends, and at that point, maybe you can help people let it go. And it's sort of arbitrary. How long is it fair? If it's full of anger, I think at some point it's not fair. But if it becomes just part of the family folklore of things that you've done and you've owned it and accepted it, I think it won't hurt you.
And then how to determine if it's fair or not, that's a big question, Well,
thank you all very much for the questions and for tuning in. And we're coming. Thank you.
Take care.